You're tuned into the Backbench Drivers podcast. I'm joined here this week by my co-host Matthew Fisher, and for the first time we have the infamous Drew Pavlou joining us. It's going to be an interesting conversation. I look forward to digging into a couple of topics. Namely, I want to cover Drew's sort of story, his notable ideological progression, and also what he thinks and how that contrasts what Matthew and I think about Andrew Hastie and his potential leadership of the Liberal Party. So without further ado, welcome to the podcast, Drew.
Thanks for having me on, guys. Awesome to be here.
And welcome, Matthew.
Thank you. It's good to be back.
Yeah, it is. You've been on a bit of a hiatus. I'm glad you were able to join us. I've got a bit of a cold this week, guys, so you might have to forgive my voice, but hopefully it'll be bearable. So, Drew, tell us. You were fighting the Chinese. I think you're fighting a couple of others, and nowadays you seem to fight with everyone. But tell us your story and why you're always fighting.
Yeah, long story. I was 20 years old when I first got involved in kind of like political activism. It was the Hong Kong protest movement back in 2019, also coinciding with the 30th anniversary of Tiananmen. Funny coincidence, I was born like literally 10 years to the day of Tiananmen in June 4, 1999. So I was aware of Tiananmen when I was a kid and stuff like that. And I was really disgusted by the crackdown on the students in Hong Kong. And I decided that I was going to go protest in support of them. The Chinese nationalists came out to attack us. So they basically tried to start a race riot against like Hong Kongers and white Australians at the University of Queensland. Pretty unhinged stuff. Essentially, like 300 Chinese international students surrounded us. Multiple people were like physically assaulted and bashed up. They were playing the Chinese national anthem on their loudspeaker. It was just like really psychotic behavior. They were screaming out stuff like, they were screaming at us, calling us white trash. Like it was actually extremely racialized. It was like basically like a pro-CCP racial pogrom against like Hong Kongers and like Australians. And at the time, I was a leftist, and I've been a leftist up until quite recently. I mean, my initial foray into politics with the Hong Kong stuff and China was really motivated by humanitarian concern. I guess it's been a long path to me realizing that, unfortunately, the current multicultural sort of settlement in Australia is just like sort of like collapsing into like full hardcore balkanization, sectarian conflict. I think stuff like international students from China organizing essentially like an ethnic riot against like Hong Kongers in Australia is like a good example of that. It's not just that as well. There's also, of course, like massive resurgence of sort of like Islamist extremist political organizing in Australia, essentially since October 7. And I was never really interested in the Israel-Palestine conflict. I really kind of just tried to stay away from it because it was kind of like just obviously very intractable foreign conflict that is just obviously draws extreme hatreds on all sides. I just remember on October 7, I saw the imagery as it came in, like literally live. I remember I was like lying on the couch and I saw the first footage of like sort of Hamas fighters on the back of a pickup truck in, I think, Sderot in southern Israel. And then straight away I started seeing the photos of the atrocities. This was all on Twitter because obviously Elon bought Twitter and he removed censorship, so you could just see this stuff straight up. And I just remember seeing like a pile of corpses, and it was just like sort of old grandmothers, old grandparents, just elderly like Israelis who were lined up at the bus stop in southern Israel, and they just basically been the target of a drive-by shooting by Hamas fighters. And then I saw the photographs of just piles of corpses, like young people hundreds of corpses piled up at the music festival that they slaughtered. And then straight away, I started seeing leftists in Australia, including people that I thought were my friends, progressives that I knew at the university and everything, who literally started posting, this is the greatest event in history. This is exactly what we want to see happen, decolonization. There was like an infamous tweet that went extremely viral on Twitter. It was like a Somali girl in America who said, this is exactly what decolonization looks like. And I think the exact quote, what was the exact quote? It was like, what did y'all think decolonization looked like? Vibes, papers, essays, ? Losers. So I straight away saw all these people celebrating a massacre, all these like a brutal sort of like racial massacre on decolonial lines. And straight away, I saw that this rhetoric was like redirected back against Western countries like America, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, the so-called sort of like settler colonies. And they were saying like, this is exactly what we basically want to see happen to you people too. And I saw like literally Islamic extremists in Western Sydney the night of October 7. They were setting off fireworks in Lakemba. They had a mass rally saying this is a day of victory, this is a day of pride. I think Hizb ut-Tahrir, which is now a banned terrorist group in Britain, still not banned in Australia, you beauty, but it's literally banned in basically every Arab and Muslim country in the entire world because their policy is literally to encourage military coups against like Muslim countries to try create a pan-Islamic caliphate. This Hizb ut-Tahrir crazy Islamic extremist group. And they literally organized a rally in West Sydney on that night. And they'll say, this is a day of pride, this is a day of victory. So I just started seeing it was undeniable that the multicultural settlement was just completely breaking down into just like full hardcore sectarian ethnic conflict on our streets. And I don't like that. I started realizing, these people talk about, these people, you know, on Australia Day, they march with banners that literally say burn Australia to the ground, burn the colony to the ground, abolish Australia. And these people literally talk about, you know, decolonizing Australia. There was a speech at one of these rallies a couple months ago where someone said, like Israel, Australia has no right to exist and we will destroy it. I think it was a far left extremist Indigenous activist who was speaking at one of these Palestine rallies. And so I just was like, so these people basically want to kill my family. They basically want to kill me. They basically want to kill everybody in the West. They want to destroy my culture. They want to destroy my civilization that I identify with, that I love. I don't think I can be friends with these people anymore. I don't think these people just care about, you know, universal public healthcare. I don't think these people just care about improving the lot of working class poor people.
Isn't that always the narrative as well? They always say left-wing extremism looks like giving us the weekend, workers' rights, so on, and
exactly.
right-wing extremism is, you know, violence.
So true.
I think the Charlie Kirk incident shows otherwise, but sorry, continue on.
You know, exactly this, man. So here's the funny thing, right? Like, if you look at my economic views, look, I was never like a hardcore socialist or anything. I've always been a capitalist, but I have always thought, you know, it is the government's role to look after working class people, try and improve conditions for working class people. I like stuff like universal public healthcare like we have in Australia. So a lot of my economic positions haven't really changed, but I guess it's my cultural positions which have changed because I thought, these guys just want public healthcare. And it's like, nah, these guys don't want public healthcare. They essentially just want to kill white people. And I don't like that, right? So I was very black-pilled and doom-pilled by all of this. It was extremely dark and disturbing to me. And I think over the years, it was a very long process of me having to sort of unpack my kind of left-wing baggage, my cultural worldview. Because if you asked me a couple of years ago, I would have basically been a blank slatist. Connor Tomlinson talks about this, that basically one of the main animating features of leftism is kind of like the blank slatist idea. Essentially that all human beings are the exact same everywhere. And therefore, there's literally no distinction between a guy on the Sydney Harbour Bridge screaming with the Al-Qaeda flag and, I don't know, like Allegra Spender's mother, who was like an Italian migrant who started a beautiful fashion label in Australia. You know, Allegra Spender has been doing this recently, the famous Australian Progressive MP, where she goes, my mother was a migrant, so how dare Andrew Hastie call for law migration? It's like, your mum was like a beautiful Italian fashion designer. We like them coming to Australia. We don't like the crazy goat herders on the Sydney Harbour Bridge who were literally screaming with Al-Qaeda flags and literally screaming, "These pack your bags, leave our lands." That's what they're screaming on the Sydney Harbour Bridge like a couple months ago. That was the march that actually prompted people to organise the March for Australia. So I just realised, I don't like these people because they essentially want me dead. And it was a very long process because I started off as a leftist and I tried to square the circle of me being opposed to the Chinese Communist Party with being a leftist by, you know, emphasizing the humanitarian dimension. And at the time, I absolutely believed in all this stuff. And I was hardcore with all this, you know, left-wing humanitarian worldview. And it's a very disturbing and sad way. It's a sad thing how I essentially became doom-pilled over many years. Like, it started from the start because when I started doing these rallies from the very start, even when I was so explicit that I was somebody who hated racism, that I made a distinction between the Chinese Communist Party and Chinese people and all this stuff. I went to all the refugee protests. I went to all these left-wing stuff. I supported Black Lives Matter back in the day. I was 20 years old. Like it's cringe, but I was 20 years old. But I was basically a leftist in good standing. My one issue that I didn't align with them on was like, I guess like China, because a lot of them saw Trump talk about China and then they just automatically assumed it had to be a right-wing issue to oppose the Chinese Communist Party. And from that very moment, the socialists and the hardcore tankies, like basically from the start, like I was showered with death threats, abuse. I was physically assaulted multiple times on Australian streets. Every time this stuff happened, these guys would cheer. I remember Social Alternative at the University of Queensland. They supported the first protest we did because it was mainly with the Hong Kongers. And then when we wanted to do a follow-up rally a week later to condemn the fact that basically the Chinese mainland nationalists had essentially tried to create a race riot against Europeans and against Hong Kongers and stuff on an Australian university campus, the Social Alternative Trotskyists literally were like, Drew, if you hold this rally, you will be creating a pogrom against Chinese people and we will smear. They literally, Priya D, the leader of the Social Alternative faction on the campus at the University of Queensland, literally called me up and she said, if you don't cancel the event, we will literally go forth and we will tell every single person in Australian left-wing activist circles that you are a white nationalist racist. This was in 2019 when I was literally a socialist, essentially. I mean, not a hardcore socialist, but I was basically like full hardcore center-left, right? So from the very start, these people like abused me massively, harassed me, stalked me. My family was swatted. I was swatted with a false bomb threat by the Chinese embassy in London, arrested incommunicado as a terror suspect for 24 hours, stranded in Britain for 6 weeks because the British police basically wouldn't let me leave the country until they cleared me. And you know, I was swatted. My mother was swatted with bomb threats. My brother, who like lives in America, he was just a college soccer student. He got swatted with false bomb threats. They did a fake bomb threat in his name to an American airport, and FBI agents visited my brother. So my family were massively harassed and stalked and attacked and like basically swatted with bomb threats. I was swatted with bomb threats. For years, I was subjected to like just death threats. I was physically assaulted multiple times in the street by Chinese nationalists and stuff like that. Every time this stuff would happen, tankies, the far left communists would cheer it on, celebrate. They hated me. Even when I was a leftist in good standard, they always tried to smear me and attack me. And so it's just like a very long process where it's like, okay, these people will always regard me as the enemy. They always hate me. They wish that I was dead. Then I see October 7, and they're literally saying, we want to kill you in Australia. We want to destroy Australians. We want to destroy Australia as a country. I see them celebrate Luigi Mangione shooting some guy in the back in the streets and Purple Pingers in Australia. The socialists literally celebrate that as a great moment for the left because it helped like crystallize class consciousness, which is literally what he said. Like a leading left-wing socialist political candidate in Australia who's run at a democratic election before, who's been mainstreamed by the mainstream media, literally just calling for straight up political assassinations of right-wingers or anybody he doesn't like. So Trotskyists are literally openly calling for violence and mass killings, and they, for some reason, are just accepted and tolerated in mainstream Australian political discourse to the extent that Purple Pingers is still invited on the project. I mean, I don't see the project and the ABC giving, you know, like questions to... I don't see them interviewing Thomas Sewell and being like, oh, tell us about your worldview. But that's what they do with Purple Pingers, who straight up calls for mass political killings. And so it's just like a long process where I just became super doom and pill with the left. I think it just accelerated recently, and I think it accelerated in recent months because I still would have identified as sort of like a Democrat, like a supporter and everything. But then Zoran Mamdani got elected, and this guy's like a full race communist. He just is really open and sort of despising white people and just being basically like a race grievance grifter. And I saw the entire sort of center of the Democratic Party kind of like capitulate to him. I saw like Ezra Klein and all these sort of like liberal figures who are supposed to be against the socialist wing of the party just be like, oh, you know, Zoran has some good ideas. We should talk to him and mainstream him and everything. That was a big doom and pill for me. And like he's hanging out with Hassan Piker, who's literally celebrated 9/11 terrorist attacks and stuff like that. And Hassan Piker literally calls for terrorist attacks against the West all the time. And Zoran Mamdani like literally sits down, does interviews with him. And then at the same time, like the Democratic Party establishment, most of them are like, oh yeah, this guy's a good candidate for us to have. And then I see, just the growing political violence on the far left in America where, you know, the other day there was an assassination. I mean, there was an attempt to mass murder ICE agents. The guy instead fired into an unmarked... I think he fired into like basically fired into a vehicle, didn't see what he was shooting at. He actually killed illegal migrants themselves, like this crazy guy. And he was a far left freak and he was trying to kill ICE agents. He killed illegal migrants instead. put anti-ICE messages on the bullet carvings, on the bullet casings, and then of course the murder of Charlie Kirk, which is probably like the final straw for me, where like my family always came from a conservative background. Even when I was a leftist, I would have big fights with my parents and stuff like that because they came from the sort of like Greek nationalist conservative side of like, you know, Greek politics before they migrated. My family in Cyprus, my grandparents were on the sort of Ioka Greek nationalist Enosis side where they wanted to reunify Greece and Cyprus. And my grandmother's brother literally was killed by Turkish snipers in a battle. Her other brother was in the same battle and was wounded by napalm by Turkish planes. They literally fought for trying to like reunify Greece and Cyprus. So like my family always sort of came from like the kind of anti-communist, nationalist, conservative side of Greek politics, which is probably why in Australian politics they're always conservative, always supported liberal nationals and all that sort of stuff. And they liked Charlie Kirk. My parents loved Trump. It's not that they support every single thing he does. Like if you ask them, oh, what do you think about American gun laws? Do you want that for Australia? They wouldn't want that, right? If you ask them, do you want the exact same sort of American extremely harsh abortion laws for Australia? I don't think they want that. Like they just kind of like the fact that, like a lot of just random conservatives, right, who just, they admire the fact that obviously there are some parts to American politics that are more right-wing than Australian politics, but anyone who's just sort of conservative in Australian politics is probably going to have a natural affinity with the conservative side of American politics, considering there's such close cultural connections between America and Australia. And they liked Charlie Kirk, and this guy was just murdered in front of his children, in front of 1,000 people in cold blood. I saw the video. It was horrific. Blood spurting out of his neck. And I immediately saw, again, the people that I thought were my friends for all these years immediately take to Instagram stories. It's so funny, right? You get this sort of narrative. Oh, it's just a bunch of random leftists online. A lot of them are bots. It's not real. The majority of leftists condemn the killing. Sure, dude. How come like 10 or 15 people that I went to university with literally immediately took to Instagram stories to just celebrate the killing? Like people I knew in real life. There was a girl that I knew in philosophy classes a couple years ago who's now doing a PhD at UQ, literally tutoring classes. And she immediately took to fucking Instagram stories to celebrate the killing. And so these are people I know in real life. And that was probably the final straw for me where I'm like, okay, if they would celebrate the killing of Charlie Kirk, who for the most part had mostly the same values as my father and my mother, who I love, then they would basically want to kill my family, and they would basically want to kill most conservatives in the West. That's how I see it. And it's like, no, I'm sorry. At that point, I can't be part of the left anymore. It's fucking suicidal to be part of the left. At that point, to be marching alongside people who literally want my family to be killed, who want me to be killed. They've basically spent 5 years expressing that viewpoint, even from the start when I was a leftist, just because I sort of bucked the consensus on the issue of China. From the start, they wanted me dead, essentially. So many people on the left. And of course, there are moderate leftists.
For what it's worth, Drew, they basically want the end of themselves as well. Like,
yeah,
so often
they are
they're all white. White Jewish, but they'll so often be going around talking about how they hate whiteness. They want to take a kneel for BLM, stuff like that. They are very self-loathing people. So it's against everyone and themselves.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that just alienates me so much from the left. It's the thing that I find so disgusting. The fact that they just hate themselves so much, they hate their own culture so much, they hate their own country so much, they hate their own families, and like that is not a normal human way of existence. It's a mode of existence that's alien to basically 99% of human beings throughout the entire course of human history. It's not normal to hate yourself so much, and I just find it disgusting, the self-loathing. And here's another thing that I'll always remember. Like I remember on October 7th, there was like this white transgender extremist left winger called Gretchen in America, she had like a DC comic book. Like it's not just like some random person. Like she literally had a DC comic book. She literally like had a contract with DC to write comic books for them. Gretchen, I forget her last name, but somebody maybe can look it up. And I will never forget this as long as I live. She took to Twitter to say, like, so obviously there was the killings, there was the mass killings, and then people responded with the decolonization language. And then conservatives responded like, are you guys fucking crazy? Like, if you applied that same logic to your own societies, you're literally saying that you should be killed by indigenous activists or whatever. And I remember, I'll never forget this for as long as I live. Like this Gretchen lady with like 20,000 followers, not a random person. She literally has a contract writing comic books for DC. And she's a famous fiction writer as well. And she said, listen, I wouldn't like it if far left Native Americans rose up and tried to kill me. I wouldn't like it, but I'd probably hide. I'd probably do everything I could to avoid being killed, but I would accept it. I would have to accept it because it's just like historical. This is just like, unfortunately, like the historical burden that we have being the descendants of colonizers. And I just looked at it, I'm like, are you fucking mental? I mean, of course, she is literally mentally ill.
Yeah.
It's
Can
literally
we look at,
suicidal. I don't like politics of national suicide. It's insane.
yeah,
It's
and
literally mentally ill.
as we've been mentioning, it's this self-hatred of themselves. So they see
Yeah.
themselves as a white person, as a colonizer, and they put this onto the politics.
Yeah.
But we've seen recently in the last decade this take a very violent turn, in the rhetoric and in the actions
It has.
itself. And and so why do you, as someone who was, in these circles talking to these peoples, and you've seen this development over time, what's the kind of psychological
Yeah.
or moral framework for these people to actually call for violence? Because John
Yeah.
and I, we would never call anyone listening to this to violence or
Yeah.
condone
Of
it
course.
in any way. But it seems all too common. You're talking about the socialists in UQ, talking
Yeah.
about all these people in creative arts medias. They feel emboldened to
Yeah.
celebrate political assassinations. Why do you think that violence is so acceptable on the political left?
Oh, look, that's actually a great question. And look, it's funny, right? Because obviously, when you convert politically, there'll always be people who, like, see you as a traitor and say you're not trustworthy and stuff like that. But listen, because I actually was a leftist for so long, it means that I have a unique insight into their like fucked up psychology. And I understand how these people think. And I can tell you, right, like when I was like 18, 19, and I remember reading about I remember I saw somebody talk about the grooming gangs in Britain. This would have been like 2018, 2019. I would have just been like, oh no, that's just right-wing propaganda. Just immediately dismiss it. Because you literally can't compute it within your worldview. You literally can't compute it within your worldview. And the calls for self-hatred and violence, I think a lot of these people think that by sort of like choosing the side of self-hatred and like sort of like wanting to kill white people and stuff like that, that they would be like therefore like protected in a revolution. I think like that's part of the psychology. I think some of these guys think like, well, if I'm like one of the white leftists who says that like white people should be like killed in an uprising, then they will like protect me because I'm one of the good ones. I think it's actually part of that. I think
I think I've heard it expressed before that we need anti-racism, multiculturalism, and basically to be nice to minorities within the West because one day they will be the majority and we want to have the same treatment in return. I don't know if it was Bill Clinton or someone like that, but a lot of these like sort of former generation leftists have
yeah.
expressed similar to that,
The other
and I
thing
think
I
it is
know,
naive.
the other thing that I can say about their psychology, and this is something I think for sure, I think this is for sure part of it. I think they genuinely believe that by making white people a minority in like America, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, Europe, I think they genuinely believe that they will actually solve the issue of racism, which is so naive and such a misunderstanding because by actually doing that, they're massively raising the salience of race as a political issue for white people. The reality is, if you look at like the period 1970 to 1920, no, sorry, if you look at the period from 1970 to 2020, like that 50-year period, white people are probably the most tolerant group in the entire world because they were the ones who like literally pioneered like non-discriminatory immigration policies, mass demographic change, multiculturalism and stuff like that. Like, I think they genuinely believe that by making white people a minority, that they're going to solve the issue of racism once and for all. There will no longer be any racial conflict. And I think part of it as well is kind of like a belief that there has to be sort of like uh, payback or kind of like this is just like the historical necessity as kind of like reparations for all the bad things that white people did in the past. I think that's a big part of the psychology as well. I think they literally just think that like because of slavery, because of colonialism, because of like World War II and all the horrors that have been associated with like, like a lot of, obviously there were a lot of terrible things that took place in history. But they seem to have this exceptionalist view where they think only white people were capable of sort of like race atrocities in human history, which is like not true when you look at the fact that like the Ottoman Empire had massive slavery, like North African slave trade was massive thing. They'd literally steal Europeans as slaves and stuff like that. Like you look at the Japanese Empire in World War II, they literally carried out like massively horrific genocide across like half of Asia. So of course, like I think honestly, like atrocities are something that unfortunately it's possible with every single group in the entire world. But I think they just have this sort of exceptionalist view where it's like only white people are evil and racist. Therefore, like you must basically, like as reparations, dilute the power of white people and make them into minorities, and then therefore like all the historical sins will be erased away. It's a very strange and weird way of thinking. I think Tom Holland, who himself is like a liberal, but he is like this British historian, and he argues that a part of it is kind of like displaced Christian feeling, where it's like these people are all atheists or secular. They don't have Christianity. They believe in basically like original sin, the sort of Christian moral framework, but because they're not actually Christian, because they don't actually believe in religion, there's no actual way of expunging original sin in their worldview. And the original sin is basically like whiteness and colonialism, all this stuff. And so like the only thing that they can kind of like do is sort of like, I don't know, like take the knee and say sorry and just dissolve their countries and all this stuff. It's a very strange, again, this is a very strange, like fascinatingly bizarre way of thinking. And 99% of human beings on the planet, if you went to China, they don't think like that. If you go to Japan, they don't think like that. If you go to Korea, they don't think like that. If you go to like India, they don't think like that. Like if you go to most African countries, they don't think like that. It's really this very strong self-loathing. It's a very hardcore sort of ideological thing. I think part of it is that
Dr. Jared Taylor describes it as pathological altruism, where it's at the point of like, they're so self-sacrificing, they've lost the message of the Christian gospel, and it's to the point where they help other people to the detriment of not just themselves, but their entire group, and they feel good for it. They feel like really moral people.
I think a big part of it is this kind of like moral conception that foreigners are literally more morally deserving than citizens. And so I can't remember the exact minister, but it was somebody in the Blair government, and it was like a Labour minister. And I remember they wrote in their biography, again, I'm spewing that I can't remember the name of this guy, but they literally wrote in their biography, like the way they conceptualized their position as a minister in the British government in like 2003 was like they had to alleviate global poverty and global suffering, and like that was the priority above the like literal well-being of people in Britain, which is complete bullshit, because like if you look at living standards in Britain, like they're terrible right now. Like there are parts of Britain, the like regional countries, like not, if you go outside of London, you go to parts of Britain, they literally have the poorest parts of Europe in parts of Britain, right? Like it is like almost developing country levels of poverty in some of these places in Britain. I remember in 2022, I went to Ukraine to deliver aid, and as part of that, I stayed a couple of weeks in Poland. And there's been a lot of beautiful economic development in Poland. Like you go to some of these like rural countryside towns in Poland, and like they're really developing and they look really nice. In the same year, I was in Britain, and I got stuck over there for a couple of weeks because of that crazy swatting threat and everything. As part of that, I went out to Swindon one day, and just to watch a football match. And some of the streets around the football stadium in Swindon, which is kind of like one of these sort of like post-industrial towns in Britain, like literally were like developing world levels of poverty. It was like literally third world conditions in some of these places. So it is just this. It is as you. I'm not saying Jared Taylor, but like
your demographics are destiny posting here, Drew. You're so close to just being an Amran speaker. I think you should take that final leap.
No, look, I still conceive of myself as a moderate, and I'll go into that later, because the way I describe my politics is demographic stabilization rather than like hardcore majoritarianism, and we can go into that later. But I think there is definitely something to be said about the fact that there's this kind of like pathological approach where they genuinely think that like the way to define yourself as a moral person is to love foreigners, love people that are like really far away from your own community and your own family and stuff like that. And it is, again, it's a very strange way of thinking that it would be foreign to basically most people on the entire planet, except for like sort of like wealthy, upper middle class, sort of educated Westerners.
I have my own theory for why, and this is going back a little bit in the conversation, why the left is so violent. I believe that because radicalism is actually part of their ideology, it's actually like the end, not necessarily a process to get to a utopia. They actually want to be radical, and because their ideas are now mainstream, anti-racism is mainstream, whereas opposed to back in the 60s, yes, you could be beaten up by an Irish cop and thrown in prison for marching with Martin Luther or something like that. You could say that the hippies had a little bit of radicalism to them. They'll take risks for the worldview. Nowadays, if you're not anti-racist, you're punished. if you're not in favor of multiculturalism, you are the enemy of the society, at least regarded by our political class, by our intelligentsia, the
Yeah.
media class. And so the left needs to embody their radicalism some other way. And so they just become violent. They say that the only way they can even have some sense of like, I'm doing something that's outside the norm is by saying, yeah, I'm anti-racist and we should kill people because of that. As
Yeah.
opposed to, if you look at the right wing and our radicals, we're positing a radically different worldview. The nationalists, we're saying the ideas that you have held as normal since you grew up, the ideas that your teachers taught you in school, what the history books say, what the movies say about history, maybe, or about biology, about how we construct our society, maybe about religion as well, if you're Christian. What you've been taught is actually wrong. And our ideas are radically different, and we just want the ability to speak, and we think that our ideas are strong enough to convince people of that view. And we actually have an end goal in mind. We want a strong nation, a nation that represents the people that comprise it. In Australia, would say, and this is where we'd probably diverge from you, Drew, would say we want it to represent Anglo-Celtic, European, white Australians. And we don't mean ill to anyone else, but that's what we see as an end goal for the nation state. We want to create an advanced society, a moral society, things like that. And if we have to express radically different ideas in the process to achieve that, we're willing to do that. That's a part of the process, but
Look,
it's not the end. Whereas for the left, they will often emphasize we're radicals, we're radical socialists, we're more radical than the former socialist group, and we've got to splinter
yeah.
off and create a new socialist
The
group,
splintering is funny.
and so
Yeah.
on and so forth in ad infinitum.
It,
And that's my theory for why it's like that's the only way they can be edgy, is by saying, I support this terrorist group, or I support this Luigi Mangione or
yeah.
terrorist or something like that. And that's my opinion on why people like Hassan and many others are so just violent, even though themselves would never carry that out.
Yeah, never
It's the
carry it
only
out.
way they can feel like they're being edgy.
Yeah, exactly. Look, I think there's something to that in the sense that the need to constantly be the most radical person and outposture everybody else, that's a major part of it. And I remember that when I was on the left, like there's this kind of like need to always be more radical than the last person. I want to say, listen, of course there is still radical right-wing violence. Like you get psychotic accelerationists on the far extreme right, like Brenton Tarrant or Breivik, who are schizophrenic and psychotic. But there is obviously that accelerationist strain on the far left, and it seems to be quite mainstream. My problem, I think I was going to say this earlier, but part of my big problem, right, is that the thing that really doom appealed me about like the center left or the moderate left was that so many of these people are really accepting of the far left in their midst. Like there is a lot of like in right wing politics, there's a lot of people present a firewall between sort of like conservatism and right wing politics and the accelerationist psychotic extremist, right? But unfortunately, I see the mainstreaming of the accelerationist psychotic far left people, even unfortunately by center leftists. And I think there's something to be said about the accelerationist angle. I think that goes all the way back to like kind of like the French Revolution, the idea that you can kind of create a utopian society through like the purification of violence. That is a strain of leftism that's been there for a long time. The utopianism, the idea that you can create a perfected utopian society through cleansing, purifying political violence. That's a big part of like left-wing radicalism that's been there from the start. It's all there throughout Marx. And it goes back to basically the French Revolution. And unfortunately, it's disturbingly mainstreamed even with the center left. And it's extremely disturbing, that mainstreaming of it, the accelerationist angle. I think that's another way that like I kind of just ended up breaking with the left, because I guess it's over my experiences the past 5 years, having been targeted with death threats, having been physically assaulted. Also, I was the victim of crime in June. That was another part of it where like I literally was the victim of a crime. I had like $1,000 stolen off my cars. My car was broken into. It wasn't even just the money that was the
Everyone's
thing.
pointing to that origin point of where you went completely different.
That
Was
was
where
another
the
big part of
timeline
it.
diverged, and we ended up in right wing Drew Pavlou.
That was another big part of it. And here's the thing, right? It wasn't even necessarily the money aspect of it. Part of the thing that killed me was when my wallet was stolen out of my car, I had like notes from a deceased family member, that like a sentimental note that I carried in my wallet as like something that was very important to me. And like, just like, you know, that quote where it's like, they will make a fire out of your oak door. Take my fucking money. I don't care about the fucking money. Leave my wallet with my sentimental family things with me, right? But of course, this like the fucking um like the drug addicted drug addicted low IQ freak who stole my wallet. They don't give a fuck about that. They take everything and they just dump your wallet in the bin, even with your sentimental, beautiful things attached to it. They don't care. There's no like. I said this as well. It was kind of a joke, but it's actually kind of true, right? Like, there's a difference between like, you know, thieves with honor and thieves with like no honor at all, right? If they had just taken my cards and left my fucking my bag, my wallet, my books, the sentimental things with that, I wouldn't even be that angry, because money can be replaced. The lack of honor, the total lack of honor. It's like you see this when you saw that like foreign homeless vagrant guy cooking bacon on the eternal flame in Belgium, the flame for the eternal soldier.
That was disgusting.
Yeah, it's like they have no honor, they have no respect at all, no respect for anything. They just like half of them are like almost barely conscious, it seems. Like half of them are like basically like so low intelligence that it's basically NPC status. Like they'll literally just go and cook out on the flame of the eternal soldier. They won't just take your bank cards, but they'll literally take the notes from your like departed family member that you love, that is so precious to you, and just dump it in the bin alongside everything else. It's sick. It's sick. And so that was a big part of it as well. And I think all these experiences killed within me the idea that you can have this kind of like perfected utopian society, that like if you just have, because everyone's a blank slate, and if you just have in place like the perfect policies, you can create just the perfect society. It's like, no, unfortunately, I do genuinely believe that there's just like 4-5% of the population out there. I don't think it's necessarily even like something to do with race. Like maybe 3% of white Australians probably too.
But it is.
But anyway, what I'm going to say though, right, is like, I just think there's a certain percentage of people out there who are like genuinely psychopathic, who just like are literally willing to just carry out insane levels of violence. You saw that with the killing of Erna, right? That Ukrainian girl, like just a schizophrenic homeless guy just stabs her in the neck for no reason, absolutely no reason at all, and she's just murdered. Like there's just a certain percentage of people out there who like leftists for some reason believe like if you gave the guy who killed Erna like, I don't know, like $100,000, his life will be perfect. No, it doesn't work like that, guys, at all. There are unfortunately some people out there who are just evil, like genuinely either like insanely mentally ill or psychotic or just evil, and there's nothing you can do. Like they're just evil, and you have to kind of protect society from these people. You have to try and preserve civilization, stop it from collapsing, because otherwise, if you just let these people go, and you just have people stabbed to death in the streets and lit on. And this isn't even the first time it's happened in America. Like there was a black lady who was lit on fire on the train in New York City, like just literally just covered in gasoline and just burned to death for no reason. Like they're just evil, psychotic people out there, and you have to protect society from them. You can't. So my belief that you can just have this utopian, perfect society, like every single person is the same. If you just give every single person the exact same opportunities and give everybody like $1 million, like everything's gonna be perfect. It doesn't work like that, I don't think. Like I've just become extremely doom and pilled. There is a certain part of human nature that is quite evil, and I think it actually exists within every human heart. But I think, unfortunately, like, you know, there are just some people out there who, if you let them, they will destroy society and they'll destroy civilization, and they will just pillage everything and just make a bonfire of all the precious cultural inheritance that, you know, has been built up over generations by those who came before us. And I think that's a big part of it as well. The left, they have this idea you can just have this, everyone's a blank slate. So if you just use cleansing, purifying violence and just implement the perfect utopian society, we will create the perfect society where everyone is happy forever. It's like, it doesn't work like that at all, guys. Like there are some people who are just evil, and they will destroy everything if you let them. And that's been my experience. I saw this as well. I went to Ukraine in March, and I literally saw the aftermath of like Russian atrocities, like, you know, apartment buildings that had just been burned to a crisp, and you could still see like the Orthodox icons in some of these shattered and burned out apartments. And you confront like hardcore evil like that in real life, and your belief in like the innate goodness of the human character is just really robbed from you. And if you don't believe that human beings are innately good, I think you can't be innately a progressive person. I think it's a big philosophical distinction between progressives and conservatives. It's like, do you believe that all human beings are innately good, and if you just give everybody the exact same opportunities in life, that you'll create the perfect society? I don't think it's possible anymore. I just don't think it's possible anymore. Unfortunately, what I'm concerned with now is rather than trying to create the perfect utopian society, how do we stop civilization from collapsing into just like horrific bloodshed and war and famine? And how do you stop civilization, what we have built up, from collapsing?
That's a complicated question. I believe
Yeah.
Matthew had a follow-up.
Yeah, please do. Sorry, I know I'm ranting a bit. I want to hear from you guys too.
It's all good. And you're talking about how you became disillusioned with the centre left or the mainstream left and their inability to call out, these people celebrating the assassination of Charlie Kirk, or what's happening in Palestine, or just general calls to violence.
Yeah.
And to me, it seems there's two of reasons it could be. Firstly, they themselves are scared of the revolution, so they want to seem like, if the far left win, then they kill all white people. They want to be spared themselves by being nice to them.
Yeah, I think that's
And the
part of it,
second one is that they secretly agree with it, but they're too scared themselves to go out in public and say, do these public calls to violence or advocate for these things. So they'll let them do it, and they'll, keep them at arm's length, but put them on platforms, keep them up, say they're the future of the party, that kind of stuff. So what's your perspective on why the mainstream left allows this?
Look, I genuinely think my experience is that people like, for example, like the kind of like moderate left-wing intellectuals, and a good example of this is like Ezra Klein in America, who has the Ezra Klein show on the New York Times, and he's probably like the most famous, I guess, moderate progressive type voice. I genuinely don't think in his heart of hearts that he wants violence. Like, he had a relatively normal kind of response to the murder of Charlie Kirk. He said that Charlie Kirk did the right thing. He treated politics the right way because he actually engaged peacefully. And he was like massively viciously sort of attacked by leftists for saying that. So I think there are a lot of these people who, I think the moderate leftists, I genuinely think there are a lot of them who are normal deep down, but maybe they are cowed into submission by the radicals, and they don't want to be sort of like excluded from the sort of like left-wing coalition. They're constantly trying to like appease them, constantly trying to like I think, for example, like with Ezra Klein, I think a big part of it is that he would have heaps of left-wing friends who would like Zoran Mondani. And I think he's thinking like, oh, if I go too hard against Zoran Mondani, my left-wing friends are going to think that I'm I'm like cringe, and I'm bad. So I think part of it is like a massive amount of social pressure. And I think there's something to be said for that, because if you look at how culture has changed a bit in the West over the past 2 years, especially since Trump was elected, you have seen a rising amount of anti-wokeness, a sort of like rising anti-woke backlash. I think a big part of that is kind of like a preference cascade. Like, I think a lot of people at the height of wokeness during this sort of like cultural revolution type era, I think a lot of them didn't actually believe in it in their hearts of hearts, but they sort of like went along with the mob. And then now that it's becoming more socially acceptable to be against the wokeness, against extreme levels of wokeness, then they can sort of like make these sort of like tentative forays to be like, I am anti-woke, I'm not part of that, But here's another thing as well. Like, I made this point the other day. The leader of the UK Greens is starting this like sort of new podcast, and he's calling it like the anti-woke left. And he's like, we're going to create a new left that's anti-woke. We're not going to try censor people. We're going to be like really cool, and we're not going to be like the old cringe people. And it's like, okay, you guys can do all that. That's fine on the level of aesthetics. But I think the core cleavage, the core political divide right now in all these Western societies is, do you believe that white people should become minorities based on migration? And it doesn't matter how much aesthetic posturing you do. Like, I'm anti-woke. Like, if you still at the end of the day believe that like white people should basically become minorities in the next 20 years through migration, like none of that, you're not going to win back any of the sort of like working class voters who've left the left, and you're not going to win back anyone who's kind of become disillusioned. So I think there's a lot of coping on the center left right now. I think a lot of them think that like, you saw this when they were like, oh, we need a Joe Rogan of the left. And I think a lot of them, they just have this fundamental misapprehension. They think that like, if you just change your aesthetics, if you just have like, oh, look guys, like we've got like one masculine guy on our side who's like not completely fucking like self-loathing. See, we're okay with like young white men again. It doesn't work like that, guys. Like if you still at the end of the day basically want to have like mass demographic terraforming, if you basically still want at the end of the day to like just make white people a minority in England and Australia and America, North America, all these countries, like I think that's the fundamental political divide that they just don't understand.
Well, I have a really good question to ask you, Drew. Considering you just said that, are you willing to admit that in your debate with Joel Davis about a year ago, he was right on a lot of points and you were wrong? I mean, you don't have to agree with his implementation or anything like that, but he was arguing a very much a sort of, he wasn't arguing for imperialism. He was simply arguing that we should be able to keep our nation. It was actually a very trimmed down argument without all of the National Socialism and stuff like that.
Okay,
would you be able to admit that he was right in that debate?
Okay, let's go into this, right? Has my views have shifted from basically being a leftist to being basically a national conservative. National conservatism basically being the sort of like JD Vance type stuff. And there is still a big divide, I think, between the sort of national conservative JD Vance style position and what Joel Davis advocates. Because Joel Davis, like, literally, like, Joel Davis, I
don't necessarily mean what he advocates. Yeah. I also mean what he argued in that debate.
Yeah. Well, okay, listen, obviously my views have become way more conservative on questions like multiculturalism and nationalism and stuff like that. So obviously if I did that debate again, my entire position and the way that I would approach that debate is very different. And I was just too, I think I was just too naive in still asserting that having no, I think at that point in time, I was saying that I think at that point in time, I was saying that we should lower migration, but I think I hadn't at that point considered the fact that we actually have to try and stabilize demographics. So here's the distinction between my position and the extremists. My position, I think, is much more palatable to the mainstream, and I think it's actually a much more mainstream and more moderate position. I want to basically have what Singapore has. And essentially, Singapore has a policy whereby they have country-level caps at migration, and essentially their policy is that they want to keep demographic stabilization. They still have a level of diversity, they still have a level of multiculturalism, but if you look at their policy, in 1970, Han Chinese in Singapore were 76% of the population. In 2020, they were 74% of the population. They literally have a policy that is just, we're going to keep things stable. We're going to have a certain amount of diversity, and that's okay. And that's where I differ from Joel Davis, because I still think like a certain amount of diversity is fine. I think there are a lot of East Asian migrants who are great migrants. I think a lot of them might like integrate very well into society. I think Vietnamese Australians have made good contributions. I think a lot of Chinese Australians, as long as they're anti-communist, are making good contributions. Japanese, Koreans, Taiwanese are making good contributions. I think I obviously have a big problem with kind of like migration from very poor developing countries with low trust societies, like Middle East and North Africa. There's a lot of problems with integration, assimilation. And look, my approach is I still think a certain amount of diversity is good in society. That's where I differ from Joel Davis massively. I still think that there should be minorities in society. I just don't want white people to become a minority. And I think we should have a policy that is like, we're going to freeze the demographics where they are. We're not going to allow white people to become a minority. I think that will actually take out so much of the pressure and tension and stress in Western politics right now. I think it would only make like race supremacists on both sides of the question angry. I think obviously that policy would make people like Joel Davis angry because it would still mean that like 20% of society is diverse. But it would also make race communists on the extreme left angry because they literally won't stop until they see white people at like a 10% minority of the population. I think that's ultimately what they want. I think if we just stabilize things, I genuinely can't see a problem if we stabilize demographics. I think that's a good approach. It's very pragmatic. I think it would win over a majority of people. And I think a lot of ethnic minority groups would actually accept that and support that because they come to Australia because they like Australia's pre-existing culture. I don't believe that people come to this country thinking, I want this country to basically become, I don't know, like Pakistan. I don't think people want that. It wouldn't be good for anyone. Even if you're a Pakistani migrant coming to this country, why would you want the country to become poor like Pakistan? I think
a lot of them do support that though.
Some of them,
because
maybe
although we look at anti-racism as an ideological position, they see it as an expression of their ethnic interests. Anti-racism to them is just, we want the white people to stop asserting their interests, so my little group in society can enlarge its power base, can enlarge its rights, its wealth and stuff like that.
Let me go into this, right? I think there's distinctions. I think if you've got like somebody who's extremely low IQ, who has no conception of their own self-interest, and they're coming from an extremely poor country, they might think, oh yeah, it'd be great if Australia becomes like Pakistan. But that's not in their interest either, because unfortunately Pakistan is a basket case state. And the reason that they're moving to Australia is because Australia is not a basket case state. So I think smart, educated minority groups can understand this, that there should be some level of cultural continuity. The British institutions that built Australia are the institutions that the society must venerate and keep at the core of the society. Otherwise, literally, what is even the point of moving to this country? It will literally collapse. So my thinking is, right, if you have a demographic stabilization policy and we say to ethnic minority groups, listen, I'm going to protect you from the Joel Davis psychotypes. I'm going to protect you from people who literally want scary purges and all that sort of stuff. We're going to keep the diversity level at about 20% of the society, and we're going to stop white people from becoming a minority. We're still going to allow some level of diversity, and we will protect you from the really scary guys who literally want mass purges. I think they can get on board with that. There are obviously going to be some insane race communists who will never accept that. And honestly, if you're a race communist that literally comes to Australia and wants to try and terraform the demographics of Australia, you should actually be deported. And that's where Singapore is actually a good society. Singapore has a policy where, like, if you go to Singapore and you decide that you're going to do Islamic extremism and do Islamic political organizing, they just deport you. So I think we just basically should have policies where it's like, we're going to have a certain amount of diversity in society. That's good. People who've already been in the country for 60, 70 years, we're going to protect you. As long as you still support the country and you're still patriotic, you have to have your first loyalty to Australia. If you're somebody who's being subversive and you want to destroy the country, you want to try to like completely make white people into like a 10% minority, you're a race communist, I think at that point you should be deported. But I think people who are minority groups who are patriotic, that they're willing to tolerate or accept, just stabilization, I think those people, I've got no problems with them. And I think that's honestly a pretty moderate view. I don't know. Obviously, I know you guys are
I
probably
think
more...
we would all agree that it's moderate. It's something that could be accepted by vast swaths of society. I think a lot of white Australians feel the pressure of immigration, but they haven't got a strongly ideological position. They just want their way of life to be able to continue. They want to be able to raise their family in a safe environment, have their culture flourish.
That's my point as well, dude. I think, and here's one thing. Here's why I think it's a good idea. I think one of the admirable parts of Anglo culture and Western culture more generally, right, is that we don't have the level of sort of like clan blood worship that you have in like Pakistan. Like if you look at what happened in Britain with the grooming gang scandals, there were people who were like literally protecting people they knew to be gang rapists because they were just of the same blood. That does not necessarily happen in like Anglo individualistic society. You look at what happened with Charlie Kirk's killer. His own dad turned in his own son, knowing his son might face the death penalty. And that is a level of like, and I remember some people like Matt Walsh and stuff were criticizing that maybe. And I understand, like, it's a very hard thing for a father to do, but I actually think it's actually a very admirable part of Anglo culture that they're like, I have a higher loyalty to like my actual culture and my nation, that we can't allow like political killings like this to take place, even if my own son is going to be like going to prison for this. So what I'm saying, right, is like there is a very admirable strain in the West and in Anglo culture as well, in particular, that is very individualistic based. And I'm not talking about liberalism per se. Connor Tomlinson was describing this distinction to me, right? The distinction is between sort of like Anglo individualism as custom, something that's been built up over like literally like 800 plus years going back to the Magna Carta, versus liberalism, which is actually an ideology. If we're talking about individualism as a sort of Anglo custom, where there is like sort of this innate thing within sort of Anglo culture that is actually quite open to different cultures, and actually like quite open to like not necessarily race tribalistic and stuff. And I think that's admirable. And if you look at like all the sort of like Anglo explorers and the guys who like loved anthropology and loved learning about other cultures, I think that's actually an admirable strain of the sort of like Anglo and Western tradition. I think that is a beautiful thing. That's one thing that I hate about the Joel Davis position, right? It's like he wants to wipe that strain out of Anglo culture in favor of this kind of like Germanic, like race fetishism sort of thing that really is kind of foreign to like sort of Anglo culture. And I think like the best parts
of that could be part of it. I don't know that is like, he does still embrace the Anglo element as well. He does emphasize that a lot. Like, I think it's a little bit of a straw man.
What I mean though is, the reason I bring all this up is, what I'm saying is, the average white Australian or the average white American, like, they don't want to become minorities in their own country. But at the same time, though, like I genuinely believe that they are repelled by like hardcore white nationalist, racialist type rhetoric. I think the innate white, I think the actual average white person in most of the West is actually quite tolerant. I actually think it's an admirable thing. And I think this is why a demographic stabilization policy, I think, is a good path forward, because we can also preserve the admirable parts of Anglo culture, which is like, we are a tolerant people. I'm not Anglo myself, right? But I'm an Anglophile. I love Anglo culture and everything. And like, I love the fact that in the West, it is quite tolerant, and we do respect elements of different cultures and stuff like that. And there is an openness to learning about the world and different societies and stuff like that. I think that should be preserved. And I think that it would be sad if that was lost as well. And I actually think like the policies of the race communists, who are like literally trying to make white people a minority, like they're the ones who are actually creating this resurgence in ethno-nationalist thinking among sort of white people. And they are the ones who are like actually destroying this admirable level of tolerance, which I actually think is a good thing for society. I think a certain amount of tolerance and a certain amount of diversity is actually okay in a society, actually good in a society, as long as there's still a clear majority culture that is like sort of Anglo-European Australian, that still says we love this culture. This is the main culture that we are preserving. This is the culture that we expect and want migrants to assimilate towards. But at the same time, we also respect some level of diversity, and people who've been in the country for decades and who are contributing and who are actually patriotic, they have a place in the society too. I think that's a good model. This is my position, right?
Fair enough, and I think you did a good job expressing that. I mean, obviously we have disagreements and we can go on about it, but I think everyone gets where our differences are. And I do agree that your position has broad appeal. I think that you will be able to find that in a democratic country, you could probably get people to vote for your position, whereas the way I come at things from is what's an ideal, what's the best outcome that we can aim for, and then we can try to figure out how to achieve it, later on. But you're sort of coming at it from the practicality point of view, where like we've already had these things baked in. How are we going to make things work with the situation that we currently have? But nonetheless, I think that brings us on to the topic of how do we politically implement our ideas. And you have recently come out strongly in support of Andrew Hastie. He's the Perth minister, and he is expressing, like you said, sort of a national conservative kind of position, not unlike JD Vance in his social media messaging at the moment. And this has caused quite the stir in the nationalist right, with many saying, this is actually bad because we want to see the vehicle of the Liberal Party crash. Others saying, well, he's going to cut immigration. That is actually a great step in the right direction. And they sort of see an incrementalist view of how we reform things. And you're sitting firmly in the Hastie camp. What gives you the confidence that he represents your ideas and what you'd like to see, in society, with your vision of a more conservative, more balanced immigration intake, but still nonetheless some degree of multiculturalism?
Look, I've talked to Hastie a couple of times. I think he has a sort of national conservative position that's kind of like not unlike JD Vance. I don't think we're at the level in Australian society where people are going to talk about, I don't know, like Hastie's obviously not talking about like heritage Australians. I don't even know if that's even possible in Australian politics for a mainstream politician to talk like that. But he came out the other day and he said that, migration is making Australia into a nation of strangers. And that is still basically the strongest rhetoric that we've seen from a mainstream politician in like literally a generation. And I think it's a good thing that he's talking about this. I think that we need to have this on the mainstream. There are guys who think, like I made a joke about this, right? And like I was joking that obviously there's like this sort of like right-wing Anon accounts, the sort of like Frey-Leach Groyper account, like the Pete Fitzsimmons Groyper account, all these people. And like they're loving to get stuck into Hastie and being like, oh, he's a race cuck. Oh, bro, he doesn't talk about the Jewish question, like all this retarded shit. And it's like, listen, here's the actual concrete reality of where we are right now. Literally on the current trajectory of this country, within 15 to 20 years, European/Anglo-Australians will become a minority in this country. The Labor Party literally just won the biggest landslide in 70 years. They won 94 seats, I think it was, or 93 seats. If you consider the Teal MPs and the Greens to be part of the broader progressive coalition, which we basically should because they basically agree on all this stuff. If you combine the Labor tally with the Greens and the Teals, they have more than 100 seats in our 150 member parliament. Like that is a massive domination. The culture is against us. The culture is very progressive, left wing. You literally had Jacinta Allen and a number of Labour politicians saying that Australia is a nation of foreigners, which is literally fucking insane. Like just rhetoric that is like literally mentally insane. Like literally boasting that there is no core cultural majority to Australia. There's no core
It's almost a
people that can Australia.
self-contradiction, right?
Yeah, literally, you literally
Because how
cannot
can you
have a
have a
nation of
nation
foreigners.
which are natios, which is a people,
Yeah, you
and they're
literally
all
cannot have a
foreign,
nation of foreigners.
implying
It's
they don't know
literally,
each other?
literally contradiction in terms. It's literally mentally insane. And that is the current position we are currently in, right? And I think people like Joel Davis, who are accelerationists, like they would not be happy. Okay, say this, right? Say theoretically Hastie became the prime minister and we had a Singapore-style demographic stabilization policy. And what that meant is that in 2070, like European Australians were like 75% of the population, and there was still diversity, like there's still an amount of diversity in Australia that was like 25%, but European Australians were 75% of the population. Like that is a conceivable outcome if a national conservative government comes to power in this country and pursues a demographic stabilization model. I think people like Joel Davis
But
literally
is
see
it though,
that.
Drew? That's the
Well,
question. A
yeah.
Hastie-led coalition with
This is
the
what I was.
current members in Parliament, he would be a lame duck, basically,
Well,
alienated within his own caucus,
this
because
is
most of
what I was going to say.
his members would still be moderates that would be against his positions on, even, let's say he is fairly good on the topics of immigration and race, which is
Yeah.
still a bit of a reach. Nonetheless, how is he going to implement it when the votes are going to be, first of all, he's opposing the Labor, the Greens, the Teals, and then he himself is
Half a Liberal
operating a
Party.
party vehicle which is basically
It's
going to
true.
be constraining him internally at every turn,
Yeah.
above the
No.
table and below the table, snipes, leaks, things like that. How can he
Yeah.
be expected to implement this? I think that the position of myself and many others is that a new vehicle is necessary in order to get our policy propositions across the board, because I mean it just can't be achieved with the modern liberals, and so hence it's a shake-up is like essential, basically, whether that's a
Look.
collapse of the liberals or the reformation of a new party with the best elements of the liberals combining with someone else, or the nationals combining with the best elements of the liberals, something like that. It's just that Hastie injecting a great new coat of paint onto the old LNP isn't going to deliver the policies that we'd like to see.
Look, people can argue that. Fair enough. I understand that half the Liberal Party is fucking insane. There are a bunch of people inside the Liberal Party that are essentially like why are they even in a right-wing party? They're basically leftists. I remember that like literally the current president of Young Liberals in Queensland campaigned for Kamala Harris in America during the election. So you'd actually have to ask, in what fucking world are these people right-wing? Like literally why are they even in the Liberal Party? Is it just because they don't like unions? It's actually fucking mentally insane. So I understand it's an extremely tough position. Half the Liberal Party is shit as hell. Half the Liberal Party is shit and just fucking terrible. But what is literally the alternative? This is what I was going into, right? Like the anon right wing accounts, like Freilich Group and stuff like that. Like, what we go to 2070, right? And European Australians are like 15% of the population, and they can be like, oh, but for a brief moment in time, we were based and we were attacking Hastie with memes in 2025. Like, what is actually the solution here, guys? I actually genuinely don't know. And I think there are people like Joel Davis who, because they are right-wing accelerations, like they wouldn't be happy. Say theoretically, Hastie got in and he had a demographic stabilization policy, and the European Australian population stabilized at like 75% of the population, and it was still that in like 50 years' time. I would regard that as a success. Joel Davis would regard that as a terrible, terrible thing, because he literally wants this kind of like 99% I am pure ethno state. And he would actually genuinely prefer like communists be in charge of Australia. Like not even Albanese, like Joel Davis in his sort of like accelerationist right-wing worldview, he would literally want like a purple pingers government of Australia that would literally make Anglo/European Australians like 20% of the population, because he thinks that's a great way to start a civil war, and then he has an excuse to use violence and kill people and have these mass purges. Like, this is mental illness, right? This is mental illness, and it's psychotic. I don't want
I'm
the
not
situation to
Joel's
get worse.
defense attorney, and I don't
Yeah.
really have any connection with him at all. I mean, I
Yeah.
watched the debate between you guys, and I think that's something that a lot of people in the Australian right watched and engaged with at the time. It's just interesting to see your position shift closer to his. And once again,
It's not
I'm not
conspiracy at all.
somebody that's been
I just
sent
want
to
to
defend him
clarify.
or something like that. But I don't know that we can
Can I quickly say as well?
verbatim say, hey, he's going to be violent, kill people. That's sort of
Well, he
that
did
is a
say
little bit of
in my
libel
debate.
there.
Look, he did actually say in my debate that if it requires violence to create this pure alien ethno state, he's happy to do it. He did say that in my debate.
Well, look, I'd be opposed to that if that's the case. I don't remember exactly, but yeah, I don't think that's a big part of what they talk about.
He did say that, and I've seen him as well say in podcasts that, like, if we don't get he's literally said in podcasts, if we don't get the ability to change things through the elections, then people do the Brenton Tarrant murders, terror stuff. He's literally, like, basically threatened that in podcasts. I've seen this, and
I'd like to see you post the evidence because I can't remember any instances.
I will try find that. I will try find that exact one. He didn't use it in his language was not that explicit. He basically said, we're the only ones who are stopping people from doing the Brenton Tarrant stuff, and if we don't get a political solution through democracy, then it will happen. And it was almost like he was basically threatening right-wing terrorism if, like, NSN isn't allowed to, like, dominate. So
that is a little bit of a presentation of his, like, what he said, though, if you're saying that he's actually threatening it. Anyway, look, I don't want to derail the conversation.
Anyway.
We're talking about Hastie, but let's try to keep a little bit balanced here.
Yeah, all I'm trying to say, right, is there are these right-wing accelerationists who would literally prefer the situation get worse. They would welcome, like, a purple pingers full race communist regime in Australia because they think, like, then we will awaken the people and they will realize the Jewish question, and then and then it's a meta political victory, and we're gonna have the white men will wake up and we will have a war. It's mentally ill. If Hastie gets in and he's able to just have a demographic stabilization policy, that would be a success. It's actually realistic. It's also far more moral than having this psychotic civil war and stuff like that. Because I don't like civil war. I'm a philosophical conservative. I don't want civil war. I don't want violence. I don't want any of this terrible stuff to happen.
Absolutely not. You're right. And that's why we're so motivated to, like, reform society, because we don't want to see the violence from the third world either.
I don't want that. And so this is where I've had leftists calling me a fascist on Twitter and stuff like that. I'm not a fascist at all. I'm a philosophical conservative. My preference is I want to stabilize things. I want to try and prevent the worst case scenarios. I want to try and prevent war. I want to prevent. I don't want people to have this, like, mass ethno-nationalist violence in the West. I don't want that, right? I want to have a peaceful, democratic society with a majority European Australian culture, without violence, without hurting people, all this stuff, right? It's a philosophically conservative position. And there are right-wing accelerations who would literally prefer the situation get way worse because they think that would then, like, it'll awaken the people, and then they will literally be able to, like, have a war and stuff like that. I think that is, like, one, mentally ill, two, it's immoral, three, it's insanely unrealistic. And that's why, like, the most realistic, if you're opposing Hastie right now, the most realistic outcome in the long term is that you'll be like, it'll be like 2070, and you'll be like an elderly guy, and the median European Australian population, like the median age of the European Australian population will be like 55 because of societal aging, and no one's having children, and the share of the population will be like 20%. And then, like, you'll be like, oh, but for a brief moment in time, we had some based anon right-wing memes against Andrew Hastie. Like if the solution, literally the only way that there's any solution to preserving the culture of this country without insane violence, which is also which is immoral and also insanely unrealistic. The only path is, like, a democratically elected national conservative government. And I'm sorry that there's not going to be, like, fucking Sikh hail salutes, and I'm sorry that, like, you don't get to be, like, doing, like, based, like, wow, based, bro, based. Like, do you get what I mean, right? Like.
The media's going to clip this up. Drew Pavlou apologizes for no Sikh hails.
No, I'm taking the piss out of them, right? Like, I'm taking the piss out of them. I'm basically saying, like, I don't know. I know, like, Joel Davis is against Trump and JD Vance. Like, he's saying, like, oh, they're not, like, based enough. Like, this stuff is retarded. Like, what's the alternative if it's fucking not Trump and JD Vance in America? If your main concern was
the same position, though, that Trump is leading. Well, he was for a brief period leading us to war with Iran. Anyway, it's off topic.
I disagree with that.
There are various things to critique about the Trump JD Vance.
Look, I actually genuinely think he wasn't leading. I think, honestly, the Iran stuff was just an example of peace through strength, where it's like, we will fucking do 3 days of fucking airstrikes against them, put them in their place, and then it just ends. And that's what happened in the end. There wasn't a war, and I'm glad that there wasn't a war. It put the Iranian psychotic regime in its place. My position is actually peace through strength. Like, I don't want regime change wars necessarily. I want these regimes to collapse. I want them to collapse, but it has to be done internally. The best solution is just, when it comes to these psychotic evil regimes like Iran, Russia, China, and stuff like that, my position is I want those regimes to collapse. But the only way we can do that, it has to be internal. Those populations have to do it themselves. We just have to basically cordon sanitaire them, like basically hold the line against them. Don't let them expand. If they go out and they attack countries like Ukraine, we'll bloody their nose, but we won't go to actual war. Like, that's my position. I think it's a normal position. I think that's actually the peace through strength position. I don't think he was going to war with Iran. But I don't know, like the whole thing where it's like, not even Trump's based enough for me, bro. Like, do you want a democratically elected government to try and stabilize the demographics of your country or not? If you instead want this kind of like accelerationist right-wing position that leads to like mass violence and stuff like that, one, it's immoral, two, it's mentally ill. Like, that's my position, right?
Understandable. Well, look, we're approaching the end of our time. We'll start to wrap up. I'll get you to tell everyone where they can find all of your extra content. But basically, I did want to sort of wrap up with, I think, where you come at it is you want the most expedient, quick sort of reform that you can get because you do see the urgency. Whereas I think myself and people that may, coincide with me on many positions would say something along the lines of, we want a more lasting solution. And so if it takes a little bit longer to get there, but there's cultural change, that means that it's more permanent. And if we get a more permanent political vehicle, that's what we'd like to see. Anyway, that's
the reality.
I think where our different.
The 2021 census had European Australians at about 70% of the population. And since then, we've had about 2 million migrants, I think, arrive in the country. And about 90% of that is non-European. And the time to become a citizen is about 4 to 5 years. So it's a very short time period. And the census data next year, according to AI models, will likely show European Australians to be about 65% of the population. So we've had like a 5% demographic decline in like 5 years. If that current trajectory continues within like 15 years, it'll be literally like mid-2040s, I think. Around the mid-2040s, European Australians would become a demographic minority. Half of European Australians, half of like white people are leftists, and they don't care about that anyway. So very quickly, the demographics are such that it will almost become impossible for a conservative government to ever be elected again. And I know Joel Davis types actually welcome that because they genuinely hate democracy and they want to see everything get worse so that they can have this accelerationist, psychotic right-wing position. And they like violence. I hate violence. I'm a philosophical conservative. I want to have a stable, peaceful society. I know civil war is literally the worst possible. It's the worst possible thing. Anyone who has actually seen violence up close, I went to Ukraine in March. I saw the aftermath of Russian atrocities, literally saw apartment buildings that had been like just basically blown out and burned to a crisp by Russian Iskander ballistic missiles, dozens of civilians killed. I've seen war up close. It's fucking horrific. Civil war is even another level of evil above that because it's literally like people killing each other that were neighbors. It is one of the worst possible things that can ever befall any country ever, anywhere ever. And I, as a philosophical conservative, my entire thing is I want to prevent collapse. I want to prevent civilizational collapse and civil conflict. I know people like Joel Davis literally want to have that collapse. They want to have that violence. I hate that violence. I want to see a democratically elected conservative government stabilize the demographics of the country. The current situation, the level of migration that has taken place in Australia, it is very quickly getting to a tipping point where that it is basically almost like a permanent left-wing majority electorally. And so I just think that there's really no time for people who are like counter-signaling Hastie. I think the main divide is basically between people who are philosophically conservative and want to have a peaceful democratic outcome and people who are like right-wing accelerationists who actually want things to get worse so that they can have their kind of like dream, like their like sort of dream civil war. And I hate that. I really, really hate that. So that's the main divide, I think. And people might think I'm being hysterical, but that's how I see it. And it's based off my experiences, which are quite unique experiences at my age, having been at the front lines in Ukraine and also like gone up against the Chinese government and literally had the Australian Federal Police trying to disrupt plots in Australia by Chinese guys to kill me. Like they literally had to raid people for that. So I've experienced some very crazy things in my time. I know firsthand that, you know, violence against your family, violence against your loved ones is the worst thing possible. And I never want that to happen. And that's what I'm trying to prevent. And if people believe in what I'm talking about and they favor my kind of like philosophically conservative approach to these things, then they can follow me just at Drew Pavlou on all my social media. And I'm on YouTube, Twitter, and all these different things. And I'm on Substack, and I'm trying to argue for a position. I agree, we need cultural change because unfortunately the culture is really, really overwhelmingly left-wing and it's really against us.
Well, thank you for joining us this week, Drew. You gave a very impassioned defense of your positions, and I think everyone did learn. If they hadn't heard of your, point of view before, they did learn about it. I think we covered a lot of topics. I think we're going to continue to watch this situation unfold in coming weeks. It's going to be a very interesting story to follow. So perhaps we'll do stuff in the future. In the past, I feel like I've been very on X, I've always been, in your comments, you're going, I was especially nice to you in the past, but it was good to get your point of view in person, or at least, over a recording and understand a bit more where you're coming from.
Look, it's funny because there's been people who, like today I'm going to a wedding for a guy who like 2 years ago was calling me like a communist. So like people change. I think it's good that people change because my trajectory shows that there literally is a peaceful democratic outcome here. You can change the culture. You can change people's minds through dialogue, through debate. It doesn't have to be violent. It doesn't have to be psychotic and all this stuff.
And hopefully you continue to change to be more like us and we take over your mind with our racial thinking and nationalism. I think you're going to be the leader of the White Australia Party, Drew.
No. I don't think so at all. But look. I'm trying to explain. I know you guys are to my right. I'm trying to explain why I think there still should be a place for conservatives who are interested in trying to preserve the cultural continuity of the country. And I think it doesn't have to be the absolute doom and pill of fucking Joel Davis. And that's what I'm trying to explain. And thank you guys for listening. And it was good to talk.
Thank you. And Matthew had to dip out a little bit earlier, but I appreciate you coming on, Drew, and have a great rest of your week.
Thank you, lads. Thanks so much. Cheers, guys.
Bye. Ciao.
Bye.